Yeah, this is a light warning. I mean, you're in the section called Eldritch Epilepsy. I'm not sure what you quite expected. It's a little more tame. A little later on, you could just, skip ahead past the Eldritch Epilepsy section by heading to this timestamp or the chapters. Oh boy, it's coming. Okay, so when it comes to the Gorgon, just remember, do not stare into the Hi, hello, and welcome back to LANCER, our favorite mech tabletop RPG, where today we're talking about the Gorgon, where if you look at it wrong, things go bad. The guard dog of the Horus lines, or just the general protector, not really here to give bubble shields or provide armor or heal allies, it's meant to get in the way, with some of its abilities, and then secondarily punish the enemy for hurting you. Quite unusual for the core Horus frames to have an actual support. Well, support and defending. But even within the book, from Union's perspective, Horus is usually known for the crazy hacking, eldritch tech, messing with experiments, randomly giving them out to people, and just kind of causing chaos and damage. But the Gorgon's actually meant to protect and punish. But even still, it's still noted to have the crazy, confusing, dangerous paracausal tech. But yes, covering our third Horus license and chassis. Now we're going to be covering the chassis first, which you get at LL2 of a license, so license level or level. So everything else outside of the core chassis parts we're about to talk about, you can just mix on any other frame. But if you wanted a taste of every little bit of Horus, the crazy tech, dangerous weapons, really lethal, weird equipment, the hacking and paracausality, it's all here. But on to its base stats as compared to the Everest. Now the Everest is the chassis you have at LL0, so baseline, just a point of comparison, and man, not that crazy. I mean, for a defender frame, well, it's not really defender. This isn't the Drake taking a ton of hits, it can still kind of act like that. This is just meant to punish. It can still take a hit, and namely being defensive against, other tech attacks. A bit more health, but a little weaker on the repair and heat side. All of this is almost made up for in the next section alongside some of its other, components, traits. It's not really here for its base stats, it's all the crazy stuff it can do. But saying that, here you go. You've seen the arrows, you've seen it compared to the Everest, take your picture, we're moving on. Now the Gorgon itself is a size 2 chassis, actually one of the bigger ones. But on this size 2 frame, you also have one flex mount and 2 main mounts, so you can actually be quite the weapons platform. Compared to the last Horus mech we just covered, being the Goblin, which can barely carry anything, 2 main and a flex, pretty good. Not really here carrying big super heavy equipment, I mean you could still upgrade some of these, but you're here to have a variety of things to punish the enemy with. But now onto its traits, with metastatic paralysis being first. We haven't even gotten to the actual basilisk yet, or the anti-cognitive hyperfractal. But we're already kind of getting the Gorgon's namesake. So when an attack against the Gorgon lands on a 1 or a 2, the attack automatically misses and the attacker is stunned until the end of their next turn. All for just looking at the Gorgon wrong. Proper Medusa or Gorgon turned to stone, just But as repeated in a bunch of these other licensed videos and the status effects, stun sucks. Stunned really sucks. Not to mention that's tied to the attack, not their turn, and it's in the middle of the enemy turn, so it could be their first attack trying to hit you before they even move or take a second skirmish, or a barrage, and they're just stuck. They're just stunned. This is what I meant by the other defenses outside of armor or overshields, you just punish, leaving that enemy vulnerable to the rest of your team. Now the next one is Gaze. Now this is just good. It's just fantastic. Not really a funky ability or tech, you just have twice as many reactions as everyone else. Because within Lancer, it's not per round, you have reactions per turn. Now you have 2. A lot of your playtime as Gorgon is actually going to be split not on your turn. This is just such a fun part. It really just drives mechanically to the GM or what your role is. That punishing, that reacting instantly, keeping that peering eye and cameras over the entire battlefield. Lastly, for the traits is Guardian, a common one for the size 2 and Defender frames. You act as hard cover for allies adjacent to you. So like the Barbarossa and Drake, but tied with another ability later on, surprisingly well put together. Now this one's more literal defense, or aiding or protecting allies and not the punishing. Just stepping in the way, don't talk to me or my son ever again. But now we're onto the core power with the Basilisk directed anti-cognitive hyperfractal. That is a mouthful of wondrous terror. Not to mention its description as well, just what this thing is. Basilisk is a mimetic devised from the dyed liturgic code, so what we just covered with the Duskwing. Some of the same similar tech of the crazy lights and flashing. But now Horus just had its more direct touch on it. Now, before we even get on to the rest of the description, it's described as having been worked up to be on a mech-based scale. This does exist on a small scale. This does exist on handheld or computer devices. anything that can be a laser communication dish. It wasn't built down to a size 2 mech scale, it was built up to size 2 mech scale. But once it extrudes this basilisk, it creates a paracausal hyperfractal that interrupts all sapient beings, biological or otherwise, anti-cognitive, anything thinking or adjacent to thinking. This system screws up biological targets, obviously, NHPs, and also just general AI. It interrupts any processing. Immediate unprotected exposure to an extruded basilisk will cause encephalitis, ocular and cranial hemorrhaging, and death. Survival is possible if you have something to like break up what you're seeing, whether you just have something, protecting your oculars or your other senses. Certain kinds of implants, or you're inside a mech chassis yourself, so you have something dividing you from immediately seeing it with the naked eye. But even then, long-term exposure has side effects. No one is fine after seeing this thing, even with protection or through a camera. So with protection, you might still suffer headaches and nausea, and even after, just a long time after seeing it, bits of flashback events. Momentary paralysis, thoughts just being broken up for a moment, literal memories just beginning to decay, and what's described as consciousness destabilization. And even with the Union not knowing the dyed liturgic code, original origin connection, it's still labeled as paracausal tech because they don't know how it functions. They have no idea why the pattern is, 1, just doing this effect in the first place, and 2, ignoring all the allies in the user. It's not really a targeted thing, it's just anything perceiving it. But that's the description of the Basilisk. Now on to what it actually does mechanically. When you activate Extrude Basilisk as a quick action, it lasts for the rest of the scene, and whenever an enemy is about to attack you or an ally within the free spaces of you, they must make a system save before the attack. If the save succeeds, they can continue on their turn normally and attack. If they fail the save, they are stunned until the end of their next turn. The target can only be stunned by this effect once per scene, so you can't keep them forever stunned. And that's partly why I focused more on the description of the Basilisk, because what it's described that it can do just feels like it should really hurt. But really it's just disrupting. Still good, don't get me wrong, again, stun sucks, and having a new passive stun that just lasts for the entire scene, it's really good. But enough about the core power and the chassis itself, onto the license and the other things you can add to other mechs. LL1's Mimic Mesh, 2 system points. Now Mimic Mesh is actually just a bit of benign horror script. It's just giving you a map data of everything going on within sensors. So where your allies are, where you are, superpositional data, 3 dimensions, just more awareness of the battlefield, mimicking everything that's going on. But what it allows you to do is use your reactions. So when you activate Mimic Mesh as a quick action, pick an ally within sensors to be your target. Now for the rest of this round until the start of your next turn, you have a new reaction of battlefield awareness. As again, you're following everything being mapped out in the superpositional data of everyone on your team, and namely focusing on the one person you picked as the target. Now what triggers this reaction is if a hostile action is taken against your target. Not an attack, not a tech attack, just a hostile action. Once this reaction triggers, you can move up to 3 spaces towards your ally, interrupting whatever's going on. So whether it's an attack, whether it's the grappling, your movement immediately interrupts, supersedes, and then allows the action to continue after you've gone there. But let's say there's just a hapless goblin in the middle of nowhere with a railgun being charged up to fire at it. The Gorgon spots this about to happen, dashes over in front of it, provides hard cover for the goblin, having the shot miss. And one of the best parts about this has no limit for the round. It's not a one-time use reaction, this lasts for however many times it's triggered. And even if you can't get immediately next to your ally, you still have a second reaction. So if you just needed 3 more spaces to get in range for something else. Next up is the Sentinel drone for 2 system points. So this drone can actually be deployed to anywhere within line of sight and sensors. Once it deploys, it has a burst 2 security perimeter where if any hostile character makes an attack within that burst 2, they take 3 kinetic damage as the Sentinel just shoots them with automatic fire. Now this damage is before any attack they make, so there's not a limit. And there's no attack roll or save, it just does the damage if they make an attack, or are going to make an attack. You can then also use another quick action to either recall it or redeploy it somewhere else within sensors as it flies around, or crawls around. In fact, there's no real appearance to the Sentinel drone. It varies wildly like a lot of other horse frames. The one key thing to a Sentinel drone is its function. Deny the enemy, protect the mother unit. Really good to combo with the Hydra. Next up we have Scorpion version 70.1 with 2 system points. Once again, a bit of benign code, or actually based off theory code before the Deimos event, it has turned into something else once Horus got its hands on it, and hundreds of years. Again, version 70.1. Once previously a pretty benign, just defensive script, this is meant to punish the enemy for hurting you with tech. So the Scorpion triggers whenever an enemy is making a tech attack and misses, or is making a tech action against you and you pass the save. Well, not just you or an ally adjacent to you. Once it triggers, the Scorpion goes into actions with the target and you pick one of 2 options. The attacker becomes impaired until the end of their next turn and takes 2 heat as their systems are just flooded and things are going wrong, as the Scorpion's stinger has invaded their system. Or the target becomes jammed until the end of their next turn, as the Scorpion just silences them. But no attack roll on your part, no save on their part, They just need to screw up or you to succeed on that save. Another just passive defense, no charges tied to this, it just happens. This really begins to epitomize, even within the tech realm, that the Gorgon is something you don't want to attack. It's not that it's highly armored plating, it's not the Drake. It just hurts to hurt. Or hurts to attempt to hurt. Next up for the overprotective Mother of Horus, we have the Monitor module, 2 system points. Similar to Mimic Mesh, as a quick action, pick an allied target adjacent to you. Then roll a d3, this is how many charges you have of the ability. Until the end of your next turn, whenever your target is attacked, you can spend one of these charges to make a skirmish action against the attacker. The attack's damage is halved alongside burn and heat damage also being halved, but still being able to get an attack as a reaction, that's not just Overwatch, you have another source. Also, all unused charges are lost when the effect ends. Where a lot of these other things were abilities to either have enemies be stunned or screw them up and making them impaired through tech attacks, this is just shooting them when they hurt you. Or specifically hurt an ally. Now, kicking off LL3, we have the only weapon of the license, the Vorpal Gun. A main cannon, range of 5, and 2d6 kinetic damage. However, there's a bit of a catch. You can only use this on a reaction, and a specific reaction at that. So once equipped, you gain the Snicker Snack reaction, which you can use once per round. Whenever a hostile character within range and line of sight of the Vorpal Gun deals damage to an allied character, you can attack with the Vorpal Gun. Unlike the other reaction attacks, this doesn't deal half damage, it's the 2d6. And compared to a lot of weapons, that's a good amount of damage. So that's the mechanics, the actual shooty bits of the gun, but we're a little off kilter here. So laser dish array, right? And also usual things with Gorgon, Medusa, it's the head, it's the eyes staring back at you, it's looking at them, and it looking at you. But also the Gorgon has a lot of different camera systems, so these could be both the Mimic Mesh, the scanners, or the aperture. But Vorpal is a made-up word that's been kind of co-opted in fantasy to mean something extremely sharp, and the fact it's doing 2d6 damage makes me think, all of these things are just normal hands. What looks like it's extremely sharp and could deal damage, and is also an aperture you're not meant to look- oh yeah. I think it fires these things. I think this is the Vorpal Gun alongside the laser dish array. Just firing out javelin-like antennae at people, doing 2d6 skewering things. That's not directly confirmed anywhere, but just, I don't see any other weapons here. But now moving on to our final part of LL3, SCYLLA class NHP. This is really the core of the Gorgon, the protective systems. This thing does not want any of you to get hurt, none of its allies. And also not itself if it can help it. So for 3 system points, you install the NHP and you have the AI tag and the Unleash SCYLLA quick action. It gives you 2 heat every time you activate it and gives you a new reaction type until the start of your next turn. You can use this reaction twice per round, and when you actually activate the quick action, you have to pick one of 2 different triggers. So you don't pick the trigger for the reaction during the reaction, you have to pick it when you're activating the ability. Firstly, a hostile character makes an attack against you or an allied character within range 3 of you, or a hostile character attempts to make a hostile action against or interact with an object you have picked within line of sight. Everyone is also aware of the object chosen as all your scanners are hyper-focused on it. And once this is actually triggered, you just make another skirmish against the target, dealing half damage, half heat, half burn. This just gives you another reliable way, sure at the cost of 2 heat triggering it ahead of time, but of more skirmish actions in the middle of reactions. So it's less actual gunboat in the middle of your turn and more just hunkering down near your allies and making sure to punish the enemy whenever they attack. You are a living bear trap, and SCYLLA is just more of that. It is a trap, it's a guardian. And not as being a physical wall, but taking lives. But onto why it's so protective. Of its pilots, of all the pilots' allies. Because that's not you making that skirmish action with a reaction, that's SCYLLA. That's your NHP. And also going to touch on why it's considered like a loyal dog. So within the early Gorgon pattern groups, they hid a dormant NHP, SCYLLA, that the USB, which had their hands on one of these patterns, was experimenting with, sent through a Ballwinder-Bolaño test. You end up with a similar situation of the Osiris story, USB poking around, finding some kind of dormant NHP within some code work of a pattern, but after it was no longer dormant and awoken, they couldn't pin down any kind of specific subjectivity. There wasn't just one, seemingly. It was still one entity of an NHP, but not one subjectivity, not one line of thought. And it quickly began to fall into a cascade, sending its pattern groups, its basilisk, all over the facility. In this panic, in wanting to defend itself and wanting to get away from this danger, being poked and prodded by all these things, all these eyes, eventually the site security managed to work their way to its prime unit, taking it out with steady kinetic and laser fire. Defabricate. They blew it up. They just shot the prime core unit, that Gorgon frame that they were testing and prodding that the NHP was dormant within. And with a smoldering husk, that was the end of it. That was the end of SCYLLA. And what seemed to be the end for USB would prove it wasn't, with it becoming a permanent part of the Horus license. As it was collected, if you treat it right, it'll treat you like a loyal dog does its master, wanting to protect you as a part of its pack. As that as its core instinct is not just survival. That's what it was at first, but it hurt. It was hurt. It wanted to be free of the USB, and it simply was defabricated. If it wasn't for Horus, it would be extinct. It wouldn't exist. And just as it tries to preserve not just itself, but the other subjectivities scattered around and panicked within it, it is protecting you. It's protecting your allies, your team, punishing everything that hurts you and it. And honestly, if there was going to be a tier list of like, what's a good cascade? I mean, it's still dangerous to everyone else around it, but if there was going to be a cascade you want, it's not a bad one. But that is the license. That is the Gorgon. The defender through punishment. The very prickly porcupine. You don't want to hit it. Not this heavily armored walking bunker protecting its allies and setting up fortifications. It's just going out into the middle of combat, staying next to allies, daring you to hit it. Because while it kind of fits the support or defender role, you gotta remember it's a Horus chassis. Because you might be just going out, seeing a small dinky goblin that hasn't gotten any of its hacking off. You've caught it by surprise. You go to fire, and all of a sudden, there's a massive size 2 frame in front of it that your shot just plinked off the armor of. You just got shot, missing a leg. You have no idea what to do. You're panicking and reacting. You try to hack its systems, try and stop it from moving or doing anything, and all of a sudden, everything's impaired, screens flashing, everything goes dark. And when your cameras flicker back on, you don't see the Gorgon. You don't see that goblin. You don't see the hangar bay you were just in.
You see the horrors of dying. You see...
Thank you for watching the video, and man, we've had a good old time with this one. Yes, the Gorgon, the defender, the support of Horus, and always freaky, weird, and anachronistic in that role. And you want that from one of their chassis. But a fun one, a fun, funky one mechanically. And also SCYLLA, because SCYLLA doesn't have much in the way of actual description on its personality, because no one had its hands properly around it. And also it's not a single subjectivity. It's just a panicked, flickering, trying to preserve itself, and wanting to punish anything that tried to destroy it. Also, did you know SCYLLA had, like, dog heads at the end of the eel-like legs? The actual mythological monster, not just the NHP. Though the NHP could have that. Oh boy. Anywho, I'll let you imagine. Actually, yeah. What do you think SCYLLA looks like? Both the various holographic images you might find, or its exact nature with the indirect subjectivity. But anywho, thanks again for watching. A thank you to my patrons, and have a nice day, and welcome to the new year!
A good demo man? If I were a bad demo man, I wouldn't be sitting here discussing it with you now, would I?